We're basically out here doing some scouting, but more so just kind of coming out here to hang trail cameras. I was actually out here last week in a different area and hung like 5 cameras, and sure enough, just like a few days ago, they had an F1 tornado come through, winds over 100 miles an hour, and I don't think the actual path of the tornado went right through here. I think it was like maybe 2 miles away, but as you can see, like 1 out of every 3 trees at least, and I can even see off in the distance, there's some areas where it's just wide open. It looks like a logging company came through and just took out swaths of timber. There's a lot of oak trees that used to be standing tall here. There's a bur oak right here that's down, a bunch of red oaks that we passed walking through. So it's gonna be really interesting trying to see, number one, where am I gonna hang these extra cameras, and number two, the other reason we really wanted to get back in here was just to see like what it looks like and how bad is this area all torn up. Obviously there's a ton more cover now, but also there's a bunch of these, historical deer trails that I've scouted over the past several years that are now, they got trees blowing down all over the place. So it'll be interesting to see like how that changes things, just due to the fact that this woods now looks entirely different than it did just a few days ago. And this is gonna stay this way for, a long time. Obviously with more sunlight hitting the forest floor, I would imagine that this area and region is just gonna start to get really thick. And there was obviously a lot of bedding cover around, so I would imagine for the time being, there's a lot more cover where the deer can feel secure. So that might make them more spread out, at least until the leaves start falling. And on the way in here, when we dropped the kayaks off, there was probably a 2.5-year-old buck that was just sitting there right on the edge of the river that we saw, and we saw another doe standing in the water. So there's definitely deer around here. We knew that before. When I've always scouted here in the past, there's been a lot of deer sign and deer observations. So as we kind of go back here, I think some of the spots that I planned on hanging trail cameras, we'll just have to go in and see, and we'll have to find our way back there first through this jungle. It may very well end up that I end up putting those cameras in different spots than I originally intended, just based on the fact that all these trees are now down. I saw a glimpse of them.
Is it a doe or a buck?
I couldn't tell. I just saw the brown fur. Yeah, we were just walking through this jungle, and probably 25 yards away we kicked up a deer. Couldn't tell if it was a buck or a doe, but that's the thing. Back when I scouted this last time, I had a lot of these bedding areas kind of pinpointed, and now it's like they can bed anywhere. So definitely making it interesting. I guess just try and work your way straight through. Probably that way, yeah. Might have to crawl over some logs, but so we're not too far right now from one of my most favorite waypoints that I had marked back in March when I last scouted this. And I can actually even see remnants of the old wooden deer stand that I kind of used as a frame of reference once I got back here. The main difference is that when I scouted this back in March, I could just walk right up, and it didn't really even get thick until right when you got to the edge of the swamp. And obviously now it's a lot different right now. But we'll still go back, walk to that spot. It's a nice little pinch point of high ground before it necks out into kind of a little peninsula island type of deal leading out into the marsh. So we'll see what it looks like, and if it still looks good and that trail is still open enough, I'll probably still put a camera there just to observe. The way that this trail feeds through this area, we got swamp on one side, swamp on the other, and there's just this one little strip of land that leads off into this peninsula where it's surrounded by marsh. And we got all that oak flat behind us that's now an oak jungle. But I know that the deer are gonna continue to use this area, and they're gonna start making new trails and maybe figure out ways to reestablish the old trails. And this just seems like one of those ones where, just based on the lay of the land and the high ground and the low ground, it just seems like they're gonna find a way to get back through this area. So I put that trail camera back up in this spot. There's a couple of oak trees right in here, and I don't know, we'll see. It's not a cell cam, it's just a regular cam, so I'll leave it soaked for pretty much the whole season and then check it at the end of the year. And it'll just be a learning piece for next year, essentially, just like those cameras I hung the last time I was out here, which hopefully at least 50% of them are still up in the air and not on the ground. You know, worst case scenario comes around December and I just don't get that much data. Best case scenario, I learn something. So that's just kind of the strategy right now for the trail cameras anyway. Yep, so I got two different styles of ropes on here. On that one I have the Amsteel daisy chain, and then this one I have just the 1/4 inch one-piece Amsteel. And on that one I have basically just a continuous, well, one piece of Amsteel basically spliced on one side and then spliced on the other side. So I could do a locked Brummel on one side, but then the other side I had a lock stitch to get that closed loop. And this thing is a lot more inconspicuous than the 1-inch tubular webbing, and it's a little bit lighter, but it holds its form, so you can fit your boot in a lot easier. Don't have to worry about trying to get your boot to open up the loop so much on the way down in the dark, so that makes it a little bit easier. And it doesn't seem to blow around quite as much in the wind because there's a lot less surface area for the wind to grab. So I like movable aiders a lot, but then I'm kind of liking this one too, just from the standpoint that it's going to be easier for you to use, because we don't have to worry about having two movable aiders then if we're using the same set of sticks to climb up. So we've been doing a lot more walking through this stuff and even checking out some of the places I had set waypoints that I wanted to hang cameras in. And part of the issue is a lot of these well-established trails now have deadfalls all over them. And even though we've been bumping a couple deer, there hasn't been really much of a rhyme and reason to where they've been located. And they aren't located necessarily in spots that you would have expected based on what this looked like before all these trees came down. So I almost don't even want to put any cameras out right now, because at this point there still isn't even enough time really since all this happened that the deer have had time to really acclimate to their changes and, you know, establish new trails. So what I will probably end up doing is when I come back here, I'll just come back here during the season and just try and, you know, do some in-season scouting and try and pick up the pieces as I go. It's probably the best bet. I think that'll be the plan. We'll just kind of scout our way back out and get back in the kayaks and head back to the truck.